They say some houses remain. They say some houses do not go quietly. There is one house that does something stranger. It does not simply stand, it moves. This is the story of the small yellow house that changed places. You're watching Secret Stories. Picture Maple Creek. Not a town on postcards, not a place you find on a map without looking twice. Narrow Main Street, cracked sidewalks, a diner with a flickering neon sign that still says open at 2 in the morning. Front porches with wind chimes that complain in the same soft key. People who know where the good apples grow in the backyard. People who know everyone's name before they meet them. Maple Creek holds its past, thick as dust on the windowsills. Memories there settle in the gutters and in old, bent photographs. They do not easily leave. And yet, within that stillness, a small image began to unsettle the town. A photograph that should have been ordinary, an ordinary winter festival, became the first proof of the impossible. Charles Munro took a photo on a near-perfect December afternoon in 1957. He meant to capture the ice sculptures by the bridge, the children laughing, the paper flags strung between lampposts. He did not mean to capture a house. But in the corner of the frame, half hidden behind a post, there it was, a small yellow house. Paint faded to something like a lemon left out in the rain. Wood planks weathered into a pattern of tiny cracks. And one window, broken in a diagonal line, like a scar across a face. Years later, Charles would look at the photo and say what no one in Maple Creek expected. I walked that street every day of my childhood. I cleaned the gutters in front of every porch. I never saw that house. Those words land like a pebble in a quiet pond. Ripples spread. 13 years passed. In 1970, Walter Hall, schoolteacher, part-time photographer, man who labeled his photographs with neat handwriting, collected images for a history project at the high school. He photographed streets, old brickwork, signs that still bore the names of men long dead. When he developed his series, he found the house again, this time in the background of a photo taken miles from Charles's festival scene. Different street, different year, same house, same broken window, same leaning porch. Walter looked at the picture for a long time. He remembered every line of the town. He could walk it blindfolded. There's never been a house there, he told anyone who would listen. He brought the photograph to other teachers. They shrugged and offered practical reasons: double exposure, stray light, a lapse in memory. Walter shook his head. He knew his streets. The house had appeared twice on film, 2 separate places, 2 separate decades. The same worn stain of yellow, the same broken glass. People began to talk. A rumor in Maple Creek travels like a slow fuse. It takes time, but when it reaches someone who remembers, it can ignite. After the photographs, more sightings followed. Unremarkable at first, an old man mentioning it at the post office, a child in a grocery store swearing she saw it between the oaks on the edge of town. But then came the stories that could not be easily dismissed. A woman who drove home late, an exhausted nurse, swore she saw it standing by the riverbank, yellow against the grey water, while her radio played a distant song. She slowed, blinked, and it was gone as she reached the place. A teenage boy, returning from crabbing at dawn, said the house stood on a low rise near the old mill road, fog curling at its eaves like cold breath. He watched it as it slipped behind a stand of elms. When he walked the road the next afternoon, the lane was empty. These were not photos, nor were they part of any attempt to hoax. They were human witnesses, faces lined with certainty, voices that quivered when memory failed them. And their common detail never varied. The same yellow paint, the same broken diagonal window. Maple Creek's curiosity turned into quiet unease. The image, once an oddity, was becoming a pattern. On August 12, 1983, Helen and Mark Turner parked their rig on a side road to sleep an hour before their next stop. It was one of those roads that lead nowhere and everywhere. Woodland, fence posts with rusted nails, the occasional pre-dawn mist. Around 10 p.m., while Helen sipped coffee and Mark checked the ropes, they saw a light. A rectangular silhouette against the dark field, a structure like a small child's toy house placed carefully on the grass. They walked closer. A small yellow house, old and neglected. A front door left slightly ajar, enough to let a breeze whisper through the threshold. The broken window glinted with a tiny reflection of the truck's dashboard light. Mark said, years later, it felt aware, like it was listening. They left a note on the back of an old receipt, a small, childish thing with a sketch of the house and the words, "Saw it at 10 p.m. August 12th. They planned to return in daylight. At 7 a.m., they were back. The field was empty. No foundation, no nails, no wood chips. Just grass, tangled, untouched. No sign that a house had ever been there. Helen sat on the tailgate and cried. Not because she feared ghosts, but because the world seemed to shrink into one impossible question. "What did we see?" she whispered. These kinds of moments do not offer easy answers. They leave a residue, an ache, like an unfinished sentence that keeps insisting on its final word. Enter Daniel Harris. Not a believer in the supernatural, not an enthusiast of late-night speculation. Daniel worked with microfilm and municipal ledgers. He catalogued facts. He made lists and drew lines on maps. When he heard about the house, he began to collect evidence. Old newspaper clippings, personal letters stuffed into shoeboxes, parish records with faded ink, and oral histories transcribed in the brittle hand of age. He found the house described over and over in different places, different roads, different years, but with the same unmistakable traits. Yellow paint worn as if the sun had licked it slowly. A diagonal crack in the front window. A front step soft with rot. Daniel mapped each report. He marked each sighting with a dot, then connected them like constellations. The lines did not form a straight path. They arced, looped, sometimes clustered near the town center, sometimes spiking out into empty fields. He found inconsistencies. Official papers that suggested the house had been demolished in one year, but sightings afterward contradicted that fact. Phone logs with timestamps that did not match the reported times of sightings. And always recurring descriptions from unrelated sources. Daniel grew obsessed. He began spending nights in the town archives, his face lit by a single desk lamp, pages piled like small buildings around him. He traced signatures, followed the tiny mistakes in typed reports, and slowly, like a man following faint footprints, he pieced together a life and a disappearance. Ben Carter, carpenter, solitary, the kind of man who measured life in boards and joints and the smell of fresh-cut wood. A man who knew the exact pitch of a roof and how a door should close with a soft finality. Ben lived in the yellow house long before anyone in the town could remember. He kept tools arranged by age. He kept notes. He kept things he did not call treasures, but could not throw away. According to scattered recollections, Ben feared change. He once refused to sell an old rocking chair because he said, "It remembers the weight of those who once sat upon it." To some, that was quaint. To others, it sounded like a small superstition become creed. Records indicate the house was demolished in 1942. The municipal ledger lists paperwork, a date, an inspector's name scrawled in a shaky signature. But concrete remnants, photograph of demolition, witnesses, photographs of the debris, were missing. A form filed, but no proof of completion. Then Ben vanished. One day, he walked away from his life. No note, no sign, no body found. The house, supposedly gone, left a hole the size of a childhood memory. People told different things. Some said he packed and left to the city. Some muttered that he wandered off into the winter and did not return. Others believed in something quieter and stranger, that Ben chose his disappearance to keep his house with him. The man who lived with his past had become part of its persistence. Daniel's working hypothesis he called, simply, the persistence theory. Buildings do not vanish cleanly from the human mind. Even when demolished, they continue to exist in photographs, in stories, in the habitual ways people remember where the mailbox used to sit, where the stones lay in the garden. He wondered if certain structures, held tightly in memory by obsessive caretakers, by repeated mentions, by ritual, become images that keep surfacing. He imagined these images like ghosts of wallpaper patterns, not supernatural exactly, but persistent in the way a melody lingers after the music stops. He began interviewing witnesses more carefully. He would sit opposite an older person who had seen the house once in the 1950s and ask them to trace, in a soft voice, where they had seen it. He watched for patterns in their language. He noted slips, someone's memory of smell, where another's described the exact split in the window. What Daniel found interested him. The more people talked about the house, the more specific the image became, like a story sharpened by being told. Persistence, he proposed, was not merely memory. It was an emergent property of attention. The house survived in the angle of a camera, in a child's sketch, in the precise echo of a sentence like, "Everything that's mine will stay with me." If you enjoy stories like this, you can support the channel by leaving a like or a short comment. It helps a lot more than you think. Maple Creek's own explanation was not academic. It was human, and therefore persuasive. They imagined Ben so attached to his house that when the world insisted on change, the thing he loved simply refused to be wholly taken. To the town, the moving of the house was less motion than migration of memory. Ben's presence, his habits, his phrases, the way he carved tiny notches in his kitchen table, made the house follow him. Not physically, perhaps, but in the spaces he haunted. At potlucks and church suppers, people would compare tales. A woman who worked at the bakery swore the house leaned by the river the day she went to fetch water. A man who fixed fences claimed to see the house on his dawn routes. Stories stacked like plates. None alone was proof, but together they weighed on the collective imagination. And townsfolk would repeat Ben's line, half figure, half curse. "Everything that's mine will stay with me." Said with fondness, said with reproach, said like an apology. Imagine Charles in his attic years later, blowing dust from an old cardboard box. He pulls out the festival photograph. He squints. The image is small but precise. He calls his sister. They speak in the low way siblings do, short, factual, weighed in years. "Do you remember this?" he asks. She laughs. "There was never a yellow house by the flagpole." He puts the photo back into the box and runs a thumb over the corner until the paper warms. Walter pins his photograph on the bulletin board. Students file past, dismissive. He watches one boy linger, scratching his chin. The boy points. "Why's that window broken?" he asks. Walter explains that some things break and never quite mend. The boy looks up at him with the blunt, steady curiosity children have. "Does the house move?" the boy asks. Walter smiles, but his smile is thin. "Not exactly," he says. "Sometimes the past shows up where we least expect it." Helen and Mark walk the field at dawn, dew on the grass. They press their palms against the earth where the house should have been. Mark finds a scrap of paper, a receipt turned into a small map, with their own handwriting marking the moment where the house stood. He keeps the scrap for years. At night, he reads it like a prayer. Stacks of microfilm hiss in the projector light. Daniel slides frames, squints, and occasionally smiles at a discovery that spreads like warmth. He finds a ledger entry that lists the property taxes for 1941. Ben's name, a surcharge, ambiguous notations. He writes a note and slides it into his pocket like a promise. A child draws the house, 2 squares, a triangle roof, a crude diagonal slice across a window. The teacher hangs it on the wall. Weeks later, another child draws the same house. The motif spreads. It is not yet a myth, it is becoming one. These small scenes combine into a slow, deliberate accumulation of time. Each detail draws breath from the last. Each memory tacks onto the previous like stitches. The listener should feel time lengthen with every anecdote. There are honest skeptics in Maple Creek, people who repair roofs and count beams. They measure, and they do not rely on shadows and half-remembered images. They asked practical questions. Could the sightings be simple coincidence? Could multiple houses have looked similar in a region where many homes were built from the same planks and patterns? Could the human mind, good at finding patterns where none exist, have stitched together the fragments into a single recurring image? Could photographs be mislabeled by archivists? Could a double exposure produce the same effect twice? Daniel allowed for these possibilities. He cross-referenced timelines. He catalogued weather records, construction permits, sales records. He expected dry, mechanical answers. What he found was not a neat dossier of proof. He found layers. Layers of testimony, repetition, absence, and small mismatches that refused to line up. The most stubborn mystery remained. Why did the details remain stable? Why would an offhand child's sketch, an elderly neighbor's memory, and a teacher's photograph describe the same broken window with the same diagonal crack. This is the hour where rational inquiry and human story meet. They do not always reconcile. Sometimes they sit together and simply look at each other, both patient and bewildered. One autumn night, an amateur photographer, Thomas Reed, took 30 photographs of the riverbank. He has a habit of shooting with slow shutter speed to catch the fog. When he developed the film, one frame showed the yellow house in the distance, backlit by a thin moon, beyond a stand of black poplars. Thomas returned the next week, camera loaded again. He spent hours waiting until the light softened, his breath cloudy in his hands. He took dozens of exposure after exposure. There was never the house in any subsequent frame. He did, however, find impressions in the grass like small depressions. No foundation, no timber, but small compacted rectangles, as if something had rested there repeatedly and left its shape like the outline of a footprint. Thomas kept the prints in a drawer. In the silence of his house, he would sometimes take them out and move his thumb along the grain until it hummed. These little hauntings are not cinematic, they are domestic. They do not require a verdict, they require a listener. Ben's workbench, Daniel learned, had been dismantled and parts sold off or tossed away. A neighbor later found a small wooden bird, carved with rough hands, among a pile of old boards. The bird had been whittled smooth by years of thumb stroking. It was painted a similar faded yellow. An elderly woman named June claimed she had a plank from Ben's porch tucked behind her shed, used to prop a gate. She kept it wrapped in oilcloth. "It has his scent," she would say. "It smells like sawdust and cloves." Objects like these become anchors. They ground the idea of the house in the tactile. They say, "This was here. This belonged to someone." We can touch the edges, and by touching the edges, we invite a returning. Daniel catalogued every object he could find. Each piece had a story. Each story threaded into a larger cloth, until the cloth itself seemed to have a pattern of its own. Some said it was guilt, the town's guilt, for letting a man like Ben slip away with no farewell. Others said it was nostalgia, the town's hunger for something fixed in a world that keeps changing roads and closing mills. A few proposed more physical explanations. A traveling, makeshift home placed by itinerant workers. An itinerant seller of odds and ends who set up a small structure at night and took it down by dawn. An elaborate prank staged by bored young men over the years. None of these explanations satisfied everyone. Each explained a few sightings, but failed to account for the photographic evidence, the repeated motifs, the objects with provenance. Stories like this resist simple conclusions. They thrive in the cracks between explanations. Mrs. Lane, who lives where Ben's house once stood, tells it differently. She sits in a chair by her window and tells how, as a child, she used to tie marbles in a string and watch the summer light make them spin. She remembers Ben's silhouette in a doorway, sawdust on his shirt. She remembers the day the demolition permit came through, the way a man from City Hall signed his name without looking at the building. She remembers the sound of engines. She remembers standing on the lawn and feeling the air change, even though the actual demolition was never photographed. Her story is intimate, small, precise. Ben used to whistle, she says, a short tune, like 2 notes, and the rest of the song unsaid. These quiet recollections anchor the legend. They are not sensational, they are human. Bits of life that make the impossible feel possible in a way that reasoning alone cannot. Daniel, after years of patient collecting, offers a final synthesis. Not a conclusion carved in stone, but a careful work of imagination and restraint. He suggests that certain things persist when they are repeatedly given a shape by people. When a building is dramatized in a photograph, talked about at community suppers, painted by a child, sketched by a trucker, marked on a receipt, then that building becomes more than architecture. It becomes a repeated act. Repetition, he argues, is a force. Those acts, photo, word, sketch, are like the slow accretion of sediment. Over time, they build a structure in memory that behaves, in some perceptible way, like a structure built of timber and nails. It appears, it is seen, then it fades, then it appears again. Daniel stops short of calling it supernatural. He calls it cultural persistence. We are organisms made of story. We keep what we retell. We give shape to the past by the way we remember it. It is, perhaps, a less tidy explanation, but it is human. It honors the people who once lived there, the tools they used, the phrases they repeated, and the small, stubborn fragments they left behind. A child sits on a stoop, rolling a pebble. She draws the house with a piece of chalk and names it the yellow house with the window like a smile. Her mother calls her in for supper. The drawing rains away. An old man in the diner folds a napkin and says in a voice like sand, "I once helped move a shed. It looked like that house. But maybe I'm remembering the wrong day." He laughs and sips his coffee. Daniel writes in his journal, "The past is not a place you visit, it's a place that visits you." If you were driving along a country road and a house stood where the map said only field should be, would you stop? If the house you saw matched a photograph taken decades earlier, would you trust your memory? If an object, a plank, a small bird carved in wood, reminded you of someone you loved, would you keep it safe, even if it made no sense? Maple Creek does not require you to believe. It requires you to listen, to keep small stories, to let them exist in the margin, to understand that some things do not combust with demolition. They smolder in the dark long after we walk away. Many years from now, someone might find one of these old photographs again. They will blow the dust from it. They will look for the yellow house in the corner, and maybe they will smile at coincidence. Maybe they will pass on the smile. But sometimes, in winters like the one at the start of this tale, the wind still carries a hint of sawdust. And if you stand close enough to the place where Ben once kept his windows open to the light, you might hear, for a second, a short two-note whistle, the remainder of a song left unfinished. Everything that's mine will stay with me. End. If this pulled you in, the playlist on your screen goes even further. Go ahead, open it.